This podcast is brought to you by Free Buddhist Audio, the Dharma for your life. Our work is funded entirely by donations from our generous listeners. If you would like to help us keep this free, make a contribution at freebuddhistaudio.com/donate. Thank you, and happy listening.
So this is called a straight talk on the Heart Sutra, which is a title I've nicked from a great Zen teacher who was very keen on the Heart Sutra. I'll mention it later on. But before I start, does anybody recognise these characters here?
Monkey.
So this one is Monkey. This one is
Pixie.
this one is
Sandy.
And this one Tripitaka. Now, there is actually a very, very close relationship between these figures and the Heart Sutra. The Monkey was a novel, one of the very first novels. It was a Chinese novel written in the 1300s, and it was describing the story of the great adventures of a Buddhist monk who travelled from China to India to collect the sutras, to look for the sutras. And in the story, the monk is called Tripitaka. But the actual name of this monk was Xuanzang. So it's a historical figure. Although it's played by a lady in the TV series, Xuanzang was actually a man. And he was born around the year 600. And he travelled from China to India. Now, travelling from China to India in those days was not very easy at all. You couldn't get on a Boeing 747 at the airport and fly down there. In fact, you couldn't even walk in a straight line because the Himalayas are in the way. So you have to travel quite a long way to the west. In fact, it's known as the journey to the west. You have to travel west, around the end of the Himalayas to get down into India. So it was a major trek that Xuanzang had to make. And it's not surprising it became an adventure story with these various supernatural helpers helping him to get there. And in fact, the real Xuanzang was much more remarkable than the rather pious and boring figure in the TV series. Quite a chap. He tried to get out of China, but it was quite a totalitarian country in those days, and they wouldn't give him a passport. They said, no, we don't think that's a good enough reason for going. You can't go. So he had to sneak out. He had some Buddhist friends who helped him to get out of the capital and over the border. He was chased by the police. So that's the first start of it. He's actually having to run away from the police as he leaves. So this is around the year 630 or so. I think it's the Tang dynasty, if anyone is familiar with Chinese periods. And he meets, when he's trying to hide from the police, he meets a very poor man. And this poor man says to him, I'm going to teach you something, and this is going to help you get to India. And what this man teaches him is the Heart Sutra. So he says, okay, say after me, the Bodhisattva of compassion, when he meditated deep. And so Xuanzang sat there and learnt it off by heart. And he said, whenever you get into trouble, use the Heart Sutra. And so he was very grateful to the man for the gift of the Heart Sutra, and it became his special sutra, Xuanzang. So eventually he got as far as the Gobi Desert. He was dying of thirst in the middle of the Gobi Desert. He recited the Heart Sutra, and he dreamt of a giant man rising up out of the sand, telling him to wake up. And as he woke up, he saw a horse on the horizon trotting away from him. And so he followed the direction of the horse was going, and he found an oasis, just in the nick of time. So he was saved from thirst in the desert. Crosses over the desert. He meets a Buddhist king, because there were Buddhist kingdoms in those days in Central Asia, what's mainly Muslim places now. In those days, they were mainly Buddhist kingdoms. And he met a Buddhist king who became very fond of him, who gave him guides to help him. He then had to cross a great ice mountain, and many of the companions he was going with died on that crossing. This was, very serious travelling. So he recited the Heart Sutra. He managed to get across the ice mountain. When he got across the ice mountain, he was attacked by bandits. So bandits come at him from all sides. He recited the Heart Sutra. He escaped the bandits, got away from the bandits, many, many more adventures, which I won't go into now. And eventually he reached Nalanda. This was his destination. Nalanda was the greatest university in the world, probably. One of the greatest universities there's ever been, actually. 50,000 students. A great Buddhist university, founded, he'd been going for well over 500 years by the time Xuanzang reached it. Many, many people were studying and practicing Buddhism there. And this is where he wanted to go, to find, because Buddhism was still in its relatively early years in China, and many of the Buddhist texts, many of the Buddhist sutras, they didn't have. They'd heard of them in some cases, but they didn't have them. And this is why he was going. He was a great scholar, and he knew Sanskrit, so he could bring these texts back to China and introduce them into Chinese Buddhism.
Sorry, where was Nalanda?
Nalanda, if I remember correctly, is in northwest India. So this is where when he got through, he went through Pakistan, as it is now, into India, and he reached Nalanda. And the ruins of Nalanda can still be seen. It's apparently vast, absolutely vast. Now, he went to, when he got to Nalanda, he introduced himself to the abbot. And he said, yeah, I'm Xuanzang, I've had lots of adventures. And he said, the Heart Sutra, that's what really helped me. And the abbot said, the what? He said, I've never heard of it. What do you mean the Heart Sutra? So yeah, the Heart Sutra, the Heart Sutra. It's one of the most important of all Buddhist sutras. And the abbot said, no, I've never heard of it. And so he thought to himself, what's happened? What's going on here? So he thought, they must have lost it. They must have lost the Sanskrit original of the Heart Sutra, so I'll give them a translation. So he sat down and made a translation into Sanskrit and deposited it in the Nalanda library. And so later, when Buddhism came to Tibet, they took the Sanskrit version of the Heart Sutra and brought it into Tibet and translated it there into Tibetan, and it became a very, very crucial text in Tibetan Buddhism as well as in Chinese Buddhism.
Is that actually true? Or?
Well, what I'm saying now is not. We don't know for sure, but this is a possibility. I'll say a little bit more about that later. So we don't know for sure whether or not. It seems that when he arrived, he found no Sanskrit text, but it's not certain that he produced the Sanskrit text of it. But modern scholars think it did originate in China. Most of them, not all of them, but a lot of them think that the sutra actually originated in China. I'll say a bit more about that later, what that could mean.
Was he a poor man or something?
No, it would have. No, it's first recorded in China 400 years before then. So it's not that it only just turned up. It's been around in China since 200 AD, the Heart Sutra. So he goes back to China. He carries over 500 boxes of books with him on his way back to China. These slides are a bit, I'm not sure how well they're going to work, but this is Xuanzang, and he's usually shown, or very often shown in Chinese art, with this rucksack on. But actually, this is not really like that. He had 500 boxes of books. He didn't carry them on his back. He must have had a lot of mules or camels or something carrying all these sutras back to China. And of course, he had a very, very hazardous journey back to China. What he's holding here is a scroll, probably of the Heart Sutra, in his hand.
Books or scrolls?
They would have been scrolls, actually, yes. They would have been rolled up.
Contemporary image, or is it a later painting?
This is a later three-dimensional image, actually, a modern one, but it's based on the images from not long after his time. This is the traditional way in which he's shown Xuanzang. So he spent his whole life translating. I mean, there's quite a lot of work to do. 500 boxes of books he had to translate into Chinese. He became there are two really great translators of sutras into Chinese, and he's one of them. But he also founded his own school of Buddhism. He founded the mind-only school of Buddhism in China. He had many teachings of his own and was regarded as a great master. And in fact, on the tree Ratna refuge tree, you'll find Xuanzang is represented there as one of the great Chinese teachers. So he's one of the greatest of the Chinese Buddhist heroes. So why did the Heart Sutra work? I mean, it sounds like a bit of superstition, doesn't it? But what is it? Is there anything about the Heart Sutra that meant it was a particularly appropriate thing for him to hold in his mind when he was in danger and in trouble and needed something? And maybe something will come out of that as I talk about it. There's quite a lot to say about it, so I hope you'll be patient. Do interrupt me if I say something that it just needs some clarification. Yeah, and I hope there'll be a little time at the end for general discussion and questions. So before I start, I wanted to give you a little bit of history. The word of the Buddha passed down orally for hundreds of years. And about 2,000 years ago in Sri Lanka, the monks and nuns there wrote down what are known as the lesser vehicle teachings. Then the greater vehicle teachings, the Mahayana, they started to be written down around the same time. So they originate about the same time, but they're clearly literary creations. They are not orally preserved teachings going back to the Buddha, at least not in the form that we get them now. Although very pious Buddhists would see that, but that's not the case. They come from the inspired meditation experiences of very highly realized Buddhist masters. That's where these texts come from, in which they had visions of the Buddha. They felt that the visionary body of the Buddha, known as the Sambhogakaya, was speaking to them, and they recorded what they heard. And so they, I think in genuine faith, they said, yeah, this is the word of the Buddha. That's what I heard. So they labelled the text the word of the Buddha. And the process of producing these Mahayana sutras continued for nearly 1,000 years. And amongst the most important of them are the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, or the Leaping Wisdom Sutras, Prajnaparamita. And the story goes that these were preserved by dragons in the depths of the ocean until Nagarjuna went to see the dragons and brought the Perfect Wisdom Sutras out with him. And they start as being very beautiful poetic documents, the very earliest ones we have, and they gradually get longer and longer and longer until you reach the Perfection of Wisdom in 100,000 lines, which is a lot. A very long sutra, one of the longest of all the sutras. And people started getting fed up with how long they were, so they started getting shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter. And you've got the Diamond Sutra, very well-known sutra, which is only, a dozen or 20 pages. And then you get the Heart Sutra, which in Chinese you can write on one sheet of paper. And which, in fact, I've got it here on one sheet of paper. I'll hand it around later. And then finally you get the Perfection of Wisdom in one letter, which is A.
In Chinese letter?
No, it's a Sanskrit letter, A, actually, yes. But it sounds the same, whoever says it. The first recorded translation of the Heart Sutra, as I said, into Chinese is around 200, but that got lost. Kumarjiva, the other great translator, translated about 400, and that's the one that Xuanzang learnt, the translation of Kumarjiva, who is regarded as one of the greatest poets in the Chinese language, and who is well known for his translation of the Lotus Sutra and so on. So it makes sense that when Xuanzang reached Nalanda and couldn't find a Sanskrit version, that he may be provided the Sanskrit version. It's not definite, but it does make sense. He would have been very surprised not to find it, and the monks would have been overjoyed to receive it as well. And it becomes perhaps the most popular Buddhist text in the northern Buddhist countries. It's very often recited from Tibet to Japan, where it forms an important part of the Zen canon. So the Heart Sutra is very important in Zen Buddhism. And the clue to its sort of talismanic effect is in what it says in the contents. And that's why I thought what I wanted to do was to produce a very free re-rendering that didn't need you to know a lot of Buddhist doctrine in order to get a sense of what it's about, because it contains lots of internal references to previous Buddhist teachings, which makes it a little bit difficult to get hold of unless you're already quite familiar with all those previous Buddhist teachings. But this is only one interpretation. And I'm not a scholar of Sanskrit or of Chinese. I've just based this on bringing together commentaries and translations and trying to work out what might sort of make sense. So the name of the sutra is the Heart of Leaping Wisdom. This is a copy of it. As I say, it goes on one page in Chinese. This is a copy of it from the Tang Dynasty. the heart of leaping wisdom. Pranya paramita, leaping wisdom. It means the wisdom that crosses over to the other shore, that leaps across to the other shore. Paramita means leaping across or going across. Sometimes translated as perfect wisdom or transcendental wisdom. And hridaya is the word for heart, so it's known as the heart of leaping wisdom. And I think it's best to try and use imaginative language when you try and look at these perfection of wisdom teachings, otherwise they can seem very intellectual. The Chinese, they call this kind of the kind of wisdom, they call it the dark wisdom. That's their name for it. You know, the dark wisdom, that sort of gives you a feel for what's happening with it. So it's describing one's own heart, one's own mind, heart or mind, as a fully integrated faculty capable of directly apprehending what's going on. So it leaps over, the mind or the heart is trying to leap over all interpretations that we usually place between ourselves and the reality that surrounds us, or that permeates us, or that is us. So this is our tendency, is to always to want something in between, not just to say, this is it, but we want to sort of have explanations and preconceptions and expectations and images and all sorts of things, concepts. And the sutra itself is leaping in another sense, because it leaps over all the stages of the Buddhist path, straight to direct realization, without talking about all the long, one after the other practices that you need to do as a Buddhist, of ethics and meditation and so on, that nearly everybody is going to have to use those as preliminary practices. But the Heart Sutra says, just imagine you leapt through all that right to the end, straight away. What would that be like? And the Heart Sutra is just trying to tell you that, in some sense. You can steadily improve the conditions that invite wisdom in, but the wisdom itself is sudden. Reality is right here. Either you see reality or you're looking the other way. It's as simple as that. And, you know, that's all we can do, is just keep trying to notice what's going on, you know, and then suddenly, oh, I was looking the wrong direction, wasn't I? So this direct process of the Heart Sutra is traditionally known as the path of no steps. The path of no steps, as opposed to the path of regular steps. So it starts, Om. The mantric sound Om is the very first word of the sutra. And then it says, I salute the abundant lady, noble, leaping wisdom. So in later Buddhism, leaping wisdom was depicted as a female Buddha, a beautiful Buddha in female form, holding lotuses which bear the texts of perfect wisdom. She's described as the mother of all the Buddhas, because awakening can only be achieved through wisdom. So the sutra doesn't actually have the word lady in it. That's the first example of an interpretation. It simply addresses leaping wisdom in grammatically female form. But she is referred to as the mother of all the Buddhas in other texts. So I'm not making that up. So the Bodhi hero, noble master kind gazer, was practicing the ocean-deep life of leaping wisdom. So Master Kind Gazer is Avalokiteshvara. I put the Tibetan form up in a tanker on the wall there if you haven't seen it before. So this is the Bodhisattva of compassion. And the Chinese see this Bodhisattva as gazing down in kindness on all beings. And that's their interpretation of the name Avalokiteshvara. He can be male or female form. In this picture here, there's a female form. So in China, he or she is known as Guanyin. And in the next, I'll come back actually, but I'll just show you this. So there's a male form, Chinese, very popular depiction in Chinese sculpture of Guanyin. There's a lovely one I was just on Saturday up in the Fitzwilliam Museum in Cambridge, and there's a beautiful Guanyin, male form of Guanyin there. So this is the person speaking the sutra. This is the teacher. And it starts off by just relating this experience that he has. He's a mythical bodhisattva, and he's teaching one of the Buddha's disciples, Shariputra, about leaping wisdom on the basis of his own deep meditative experience of it. So it's saying he gazed down, which is there in his name, seeing only the 5 segments of oneself and total experience, and knowing they're essentially completely open. So I'll say later what these 5 segments are, just in a minute. They're the 5 skandhas, which you've probably come across. So he sees that everything is made up of elements which are not a self. This is what the skandhas are, is being able to see what makes you up, which doesn't need you to posit an ego holding it all together. The 5 segments of one's personality. But as well as seeing that you're made up of these, he also sees that they are open. They themselves are only concepts. They're only provisional ways of dividing up the personality. You could divide yourself up in completely other ways. So this openness is shunyata, and I prefer in general to call this openness rather than emptiness, which is the more literal translation. But they're both options. I'm not saying that emptiness is wrong, but openness I find more useful way of looking at it, because it shows you the potential that lies in everything. The future is open. Oneself is open. And if you can feel that openness, it's really liberating. It's really nice. So it's the central term of the sutra, openness, and the central term of Perfection of Wisdom teachings. It describes a way of experiencing life, the only way which is completely valid, just experiencing life as it is, unmediated by concepts, assumptions, or personal limitations. And in early Buddhism, this term, openness, referred in particular to the fact that nobody has a hard essence of selfhood lying within them. There's no soul. There's simply a flow of mental and physical events, which is one's experience. There is experience. Experience is genuine. We are actually here experiencing things, but there's nobody experiencing it. There is just experience. That's what's suggested. And so our temptation will be to identify with one or other of the skandhas of these segments. But no, they're completely open. You don't have to do that. You may tend to identify with your physical body, and you'll say, I'm this body, and all this activity going on in my brain. That's what it is, this physical self. You may tend to identify with that, but you don't have to. Or you might say that you're in your responses, the way you respond to life. That's the real me, is my responses, or your perceptions, or your habits and your tendencies. Or you might say, well, what I am is awareness. It's my consciousness, my awareness. So you're going to almost certainly want to identify with one or more of those segments. Those are the 5 skandhas. But you don't have to imagine any controller behind them. You don't have to imagine owning them or existing within them or them existing within you or anything like that. So what kind gazer Avalokiteshvara goes on to do is to talk to Shariputra, and I've translated his name as Sharp-Eye, Shari. A Shari is a minor bird, a very sharp-eyed bird. And so Shariputra, that was actually his mum's name rather than his own name, but I thought he could have his mum's name, couldn't he, if he wanted. So, Sharp-Eye. So kind gazer says, right here and now, Sharp-Eye, the world you experience and your body are completely open. So that's the first skandha, the world you experience and your body. In other words, physical form, the form inside you and the form outside you. And he's saying that is completely open. And then in case you misunderstand that, he goes through all the other ways in which you might say, you might think that openness is a thing that is separate from your body, that it's sort of an attribute that it has or something. You say, no, they're the same thing. Openness is the way things are. And your experience of the physical body and the physical world is an experience of the way things are. It is just openness. And he tries to sort of get this across to Shariputra in this way. He actually starts with this word, I've translated as right here and now. The word in Sanskrit is iha, which literally just means here. So he says, here, Shariputra, here. So what he's trying to do is saying, come into the present moment. Be here. Be right here. So that's why I've sort of expanded that a bit as right here and now, just to remind you of that. And he repeats that word several times. Iha, Shariputra. He says, iha, Shariputra. Here. In this experience, in the moment, this is what is going on. Trying to bring him back to his direct experience. You don't need to yearn for or regret the past. You don't have to have fears or hopes for the future. You don't have to separate yourself from experience with lots of psychological analysis. You just come into your body. There it is, your body and your sensory experience of the world outside.
Ratnaprabha, is that body and experience implied in that iha? So it's
No, the iha is just here. The word is rupa. So rupa means form, means physical form. So he's saying, come back to your experience. And at the moment he's saying, come back to your body. But in the next section he's going to come back, say, come back to your feelings. So he goes through the different skandhas and says with each of them, come back to that as an experience. Now try that. That also, he says, is open. So he's trying to say, come into it and then realise it's open. Does that sort of make any sense? Yeah. So we're talking about experience and not metaphysics. There's nothing other than what we experience that is shunyata. Shunyata is just experience itself. That's what's being said. So that goes for all concepts. So we might say this is a room here, but the word room is just a concept. It's not something that actually exists. I don't mean that, as it were, the room doesn't exist. Of course, it's not that it's illusory, but that word cannot define anything. Where is the boundary that sort of defines the room? The room is just a useful way of knowing whether I'm on this side of the door or that side of the door, and whether I'm inside or outside, and so on. It's a very useful concept. It's not that we should stop talking to each other and stop using concepts. They're fantastic things to use, but the idea is don't think they're real. Don't think that there was a philosophical theory in the West that said, I think it's called the language theory of truth or something, that said there's a one-to-one correspondence between concepts and realities. So the word room refers to an actual reality, and Buddhism says no, it doesn't. It's just a concept. A convenient label that marks off a part of our experience from other parts. So it's convenient. So he goes on, kind gazer, to look at the other skandhas. So all experiences of like and dislike, or preferences, if you like. So this is the second skandha, is your preferences, your feeling responses. The third one is every time you notice and recognise anything. And that's perception. That's the ability that we all have to put labels on things and to notice the significance of things. That's our perceiving ability. Every little urge or propensity you feel, that's your volitions. This is the sanskaras, if you're familiar with Buddhist terms. So this is all the tendencies you've got, all the directionality, the way you're moving in your life, what is pulling you and what's pushing you away. And then finally your split awareness, vijnana, this is consciousness. They're all shunyata. All of them are said to be open. And it goes through all the other permutations as well. Openness is each of those as well, and they're not different from each other, and so on.
So, which is your split awareness?
Vijnana. So consciousness. So jnana means knowing. Vi can be translated as divided. So vijnana is the kind of knowing that feels there's a me in here and a world out there. So it's jnana, the full jnana, according to Buddhism, is what you achieve at enlightenment when you have a non-dual, as it were, experience, where you no longer have a sense of direct separation between yourself and what's outside. You simply have that flow of experience. You haven't said, here is a point where I end and everything else begins. You've just got a panoramic awareness of some kind, whatever that means. So vijnana is the name for that kind of awareness that has now been divided into inside and outside, which is completely normal. That's part of being a human being. We couldn't function without that. But it's said to be possible to go beyond that, so that you still have the ability to function effectively in the world, but yet you don't have to be trapped in that sense of, here's me looking out at this world out there. And I should say, in early Buddhism, each of these segments is given a special simile, just to give you some images for them. So rupa, the world and the body, is likened to a ball of foam that rolls over and over down a winding river. It looks like a real object, but it'll soon break up and dissolve away. So it's a reminder of the impermanence of the body and the reality of death. And it's at the mercy of winds and waves and obstacles. It can't behave as it might want to. And then the responses of like and dislike are like bubbles, momentarily produced by rain falling into a dirty puddle. And then what you notice and recognize, this is said to be like a mirage, a perception wrongly identified because one is tormented by thirst. And then finally, not finally, your urges and propensities, your sanskaras, are like the trunks of banana trees. There are many shoots which arise from the root of self-view, but if you peel them all away, you find no core in the middle. And then your split awareness, vijnana, is like a magical illusion. And so through meditation, you can let go of these segments one by one. First, the outside world and the physical body, and you do that just by withdrawing into meditation. You no longer identify so strongly as being sort of physical and sense-based, I suppose. Next, you withdraw from like and dislike responses by cultivating a sense of equanimity. So you can sit there in meditation with realizing, I don't need anything. I don't need to be swayed by experiences. I can just be with the way it is without being constantly affected by my likes and my dislikes and my preferences. Then you can withdraw from all the occasions of noticing or recognizing things by just appreciating the meditative experience as it rises and falls, without having to label it all, without having to say this is this and this is that. And then you can allow all the little urges and propensities to fall away, which gradually undermines your split awareness, and you can get a sense of sitting completely absorbed in experience, so that even your ordinary split consciousness has vanished. And this can happen, you don't have to go all the way to enlightenment for this. This can happen at any time in meditation. You may find yourself having that sort of panoramic experience in meditation, quite unexpectedly sometimes. And you realize, in a sense, you've dropped the 5 skandhas, at least temporarily you've dropped them. So it's quite an exciting thought, isn't it? And this is what the Heart Sutra is trying to tell us about. But he doesn't stop there. He goes beyond the skandhas, and he goes beyond the skandhas to, in a way, not just the elements of your experience and personality, but to everything, completely everything. So he says everything you can name or think about is completely open, and everything is without identifiable characteristics. This is dharmas. All dharmas are open, or are shunyata. And Sharpai, the monk that Kind Gazer was talking to, was an expert in the Abhidharma, in the analysis of the dharmas. But some of the Abhidharma people tended to take it all too literally and think that you can analyse the world into real, even though the room may not be real, but yet the atoms that it's made of are real. There's something there that you can find underneath it all. And so philosophers do have this tendency to want to find out what is real, what is definite behind everything. So, to some extent, the Heart Sutra is designed to challenge the early schools of Buddhism. It's responding to the Buddhism that went before and said, don't take this all too literally. The elements of analysis are not ultimate. It's just convenient ways of dividing the world up. And one of the things that classifiers like to do is to put all the things they discover onto a spectrum. So you've got, in the next ones, you've got these spectrums. Everything neither comes into being nor finishes. The spectrum of arising and ceasing. Everything's neither morally bad nor pure. We tend to put things on a spectrum of good and bad. It says no. In shunyata, you cannot make those distinctions. Everything is neither lacking in perfection nor perfect. Again, we'll tend to say, these things are imperfect, these are perfect. But they're saying, what the Heart Sutra is saying is, well, may be useful as concepts, but it's not ultimately valid.
Sorry, you said in shunyata?
In shunyata, in openness, in complete openness, yeah.
That's the actual...
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So it's saying that all these things are completely open. So openness is, in a way, telling you, don't take any of these concepts literally. They may be useful, but don't take them literally. And this goes for everything, goes for science and religion. It's through taking things literally, insisting on their ultimate validity, that people get in conflict with each other. And also that is how we stay in the darkness of our ignorance. We keep talking to ourselves. We keep explaining and describing what it is that we experience. And because we're doing this all the time, telling ourselves what is really going on, we never really experience it. This is the suggestion. That talking to ourselves and explaining it to other people may be very useful at times, but it is only provisional. At some point, you've got to stop that and say, let's just be with it, without explaining it, without even understanding it, without knowing what's going on, being in the midst of confusion, in a way, maybe, at first at least. But something, a transition happens. Remember, this is still saying right here and now, sharp eye. So he's looking at his current experience. But the next thing that happens is that we have a different word. Instead of iha, we have the word tasmach. And tasmach in Sanskrit literally means next. Or it can mean therefore. Sometimes it means therefore, but it seems to be in this case next. So what happens next? And it literally says tasmach shunyataiva. In other words, next, in shunyata, in openness, there is no world or body, there's no responsive like. In other words, the skandhas don't exist in openness. And according to Han Shan, who's the commentator I particularly used for this, who's a very great Chinese Zen commentator, what he says is what we're talking about here is the meditation, the deep meditation experience of shunyata. We're no longer just talking about reminding you to be present in your experience. It's also possible to go into a shunyata meditation. And when you're in that deep meditation, you'll find that all these categories have vanished. You simply have a pure and clear experience of life as it is. And so if you get into a completely open meditation, you'll find there's no world, there's no body, there's no like and dislike, there's none of these things. It sounds a bit horrible, doesn't it, in a way? They're not being there, but of course they've been replaced by something very, very translucent and filled with light and energy. And he goes on, in this completely open meditation, there are no senses, there's no mind sense, there's nothing to sense, no ideas or images, no sense awareness or even mental consciousness. And so what Kind Gazer is doing here, he's going to begin to actually challenge the basic philosophical positions that people take up. And he's going to start this in this sense by saying that sensory awareness, which some philosophers and some thinkers will think that is the basis of reality, is actually being able to see something and count things and so on. So this is the basis of science in a way. So he's saying that, okay, fair enough, but in that deep shunyata meditation, you'll find that sensory sphere no longer actually exists. You can't do things in that way anymore. And don't ask me what that means because I don't know. But in a way, what he's doing here, he's starting to challenge the basic, the worldly way of looking at things through the senses in this case. Ordinary common sense, secular philosophy of life that says reality is what you perceive through your senses and the way that your mind arranges that experience. However, he doesn't stop with this. He's going to do the same to Buddhism. So what he then says is, in this completely open meditation, there are no 12 nidanas. And this is where you have to come into sort of understanding a bit of Buddhist doctrine. But in a way, Buddhism basically, one of its basic things says that everything is connected together by conditioned arising. And you can trace that conditioning, particularly in the mind, through the 12 links that start with ignorance and that go through to craving and so on, and then eventually end up with old age and death. And what he's saying is that these also are only concepts. Don't take it too literally. Don't take Buddhism too literally. Now, you might say, well, okay, so we didn't bother to learn about all this stuff. Actually, it's very useful to learn about it. So I don't want to undermine Buddhism, but you must remember that the Heart Sutra says, and I think all Buddhists would agree, that Buddhism itself is not true. Buddhism, if it's taken literally, is false. And this goes for the 12 nidanas, starting with unknowing, karma formations, all these links up to decay and death.
Do you mean that it's false in the sense that it explains everything that isn't like that direct experience of it?
No, no, in a way it's false in the sense that if you say that sums everything up, so you might, for example, just to take a very relatively trivial example, you might say, hang on, for me, there's an intermediate step between when craving arises and when I go for grasping. You might notice something else going on. Somebody says, oh no, Buddhism says you go straight from craving to grasping. So if you start insisting on Buddhist teachings and saying, no, that can't be the case because the teaching says X, Y, and Z. So it's saying, no, this is just a helpful teaching, but it doesn't, those elements, the 12 nidanas, don't literally exist. They're just ways of dividing up your experience that may be helpful. That's the point. They're just ways of explaining. They have explanatory power rather than actual existence. And did anyone recognise what this is talking about?
The Four Noble Truths.
This is the Four Noble Truths. So the next thing the Heart Sutra says that in this completely open meditation, the Four Noble Truths don't apply. So this would be very shocking for Buddhists to hear this. Very, very shocking in those days. Because in a way, what could be more fundamental to basic Buddhism than the Four Noble Truths? Frustration, the craving that makes you frustrated, the peaceful cessation of all frustration in nirvana, and the Noble Eightfold Path that leads to it. Those are the Four Noble Truths. So the Heart Sutra says, don't take the Four Noble Truths literally. Very useful, but don't take them literally, you know.
I'm struggling here a bit. I mean, this is visions to many. I go by Four Noble Truths, and I sort of find that a way. So
don't drop them prematurely. Make use of them while they're useful, by all means, yes. But I mean, I think that probably all of us have come across people, we've probably done it ourselves, where you take Buddhist doctrines too seriously in a way, and maybe you sort of hear the Four Noble Truths, and you think, oh, everything's frustration and suffering, you know, and that's because people take it too literally. Or somebody else says, no, the Four Noble Truths must be wrong because it's not everything is frustrating. There are lovely things around. There's a lot of happiness in the world, you know, so therefore they reject them. Both of those things, either accepting it uncritically or rejecting it uncritically, is unhelpful. It's just a useful way of looking at things. But you leave it behind like a raft. The Buddha himself said the same thing. That when you finish with the raft, you leave it behind.
In a way also, I mean, they... I don't know if Buddha said it or whatever, but Dharma is to be taken experientially rather than conceptually.
That's right, yeah.
Sort of what you're saying.
So you make use of it. You make use of it while it works, but you don't hang on to it too tightly. So you might say, well, this is sectarianism. This is maybe the Mahayana attacking the Hinayana. But it says, no, the Mahayana concepts also have to be dropped. So real knowing, this is jnana, Buddha achievements, the full achievement of Buddhahood in a Mahayana sense, all these are open as well, are empty. But also there's no lack of Buddha achievements.
So Buddha achievements is a translation of what?
I can't remember. I can't remember the word for that. Sorry about that.
What is the usual way that's translated there? Achievements.
Attainment. So attainment. It says attainment in the other translation. So it's not trying to replace earlier dogmas with its own special set of dogmas. It's dropping everything. But, okay, this might leave you with nothing at all. So the sutra doesn't finish there. The sutra goes on and it brings in something a bit more positive. So then it says, next Sharpai, Tasmach again, it's because of his complete indifference to achievements and because he relies on leaping wisdom that a Bodhi hero, that's a Bodhisattva, can live with no barriers trapping his mind or heart. Having burst through all barriers, he doesn't panic, he's no longer upside down, finally achieves enlightenment. So we've got a bit of a victory here. We've got the sense that if you can get yourself through all this stuff, which is quite a task, isn't it? You think about it, God, blimey, dealing with all that emptiness, then this is where it takes you to. And it starts with indifference to achievements. You're not trying to get anywhere. You're not trying to make something happening. You're just relying on this leaping wisdom. You're relying on this sense of immersing yourself as fully as possible in experience and taking that experience seriously rather than taking your concepts about it seriously.
Is that just a moment, or is it a permanent state?
It will be the finally achieved enlightenment. That's permanence, but there may be little steps on the way where you get it momentarily. And you've got to burst that. These are barriers trapping your mind and your heart. So you've got to somehow burst through those barriers. And having burst through the barriers, you don't panic, because the other side, you might try and think, oh, I've got there. The other thing is, it might just seem very frightening not to have anything to rely on. So you don't panic. Yes. You're no longer upside down. This refers to the viparyasas, the topsy-turvy views, again from early Buddhism, where we tend to see things the wrong way up. We tend to get things completely wrong. We tend to regard what is impermanence as being permanent, for example. And then finally achieves enlightenment. So complete openness means fully taking in your experience, not thinking in terms of yourself achieving anything, but relying on this innate leaping wisdom, and so freeing yourself from cognitive and emotional limitations. And that means you don't have any reason anymore for anxiety or panic concerning your own interests.
Concerning your own interests, you still have interests?
Well, in a way, you do have interests, but you're not bothered about them anymore. One thing I haven't really talked very much about here is, why is it the Bodhisattva of compassion that is teaching this sutra? Because you might say it should be the Bodhisattva of wisdom, because it's all about perfect wisdom. But what the commentators point to is the fact that the whole thing is trying to get you into a state where you're taking a genuine interest in everybody, not just in yourself. So it's trying to get over self-concern. So emptiness, funnily enough, the other side of emptiness is said to be karuna. So if you can really get the emptiness, you'll also get the karuna being compassion. So that's why it's the Bodhisattva of compassion teaching this. So in a sense, you still have interests, but the interests are the general interests of whoever you encounter, including yourself. It's not that you exclude yourself, but you're just open to need. You come across a need and you think, oh, right, fair enough, yeah.
Has Karuna got anything to do with, was there somebody here called soft gazer or something?
Kind gazer, yeah, so that's the Bodhisattva of compassion. So Karuna is the main quality associated with Avalokiteshvara, kind gazer, noble master kind. And that's why he gazes down in kindness. That's why it's said that the Chinese look at him as somebody who, also they call him the regarder of the cries of the world. The cry regarder, who listens to the cries of the world, is interested in the difficulties that people face, in other words. So you don't just go off into some spacious state of bliss, you actually stay involved. That's the idea with this. And you do it through this perspective of complete openness. And it sort of asserts this in the next bit more strongly. Oh, I think I'm missing a bit now here, actually. There's a little bit missing here, which says, every Buddha throughout time, with just this leaping wisdom, fully wakes up to complete and perfect enlightenment. So it's saying this is the way that the Buddhas, in other words, all enlightened people through the ages and all planets, need to use this process. You can't do it another way. You've got to drop concepts at some point and go into emptiness. So there isn't an alternative way to enlightenment, according to Kind Gazer. You've got to genuinely open your awareness up to the way things actually are. Not by learning something or not by studying something, not by agreeing with somebody else's explanations, not by believing something, but by actually being there. It actually being there while it happens. And then the sutra ends with a summation of the teachings in the form of a mantra. So it wants to use an esoteric means of getting the same teachings across, using the repetition of a mantra over and over in your mind. So you would associate the mantra with these teachings, but you wouldn't think about them. You'd let the mantra take you into the teachings in a sort of I don't know what you call it, sort of an intuitive way, I suppose. So it's quite interesting that this sutra includes a mantra. Earlier sutras didn't use mantras, but at this stage they did, sometimes at least. And the mantra is the name of leaping wisdom. It's the secret name. A mantra means, in a way, the secret name. You can say the secret name of a bodhisattva or the secret name of leaping wisdom. The Lady of Full Knowing's secret name. The best name, the name as good as a Buddha, the name that calms all frustration. It's true and it works. It's the secret name spoken by Leaping Wisdom herself. And this is the mantra we were doing before the meditation. And really, probably the mantra shouldn't be translated, but I will give this impressionistic translation, because the words do have meanings in Sanskrit. Gate gate paragate parasangate bodhiswaha. Gate literally means gone, or crossed over. So I've kept that connection with leaping and said, okay, this is leap. The first gate is leap. The second gate is another leap. Paragate means completely leap, or leap across, or leap right over. Parasangate, well, this is an interpretation from Thich Nhat Hanh, who says that sang, which means either all or everybody, means that you're not just doing it alone, you're doing it with others as well. The leaping is happening collectively. You want to be leaping with all beings, or at least with all beings that you're in contact with. And then Bodhi means awake, and Swaha means right on, or that's it, or, something like that. I don't know what a jargon word you'd want to use for it.
Bingo.
Bingo, yes. That's right, yes. And the commentators, of course, go through the mantra. They explain each word as representing a particular stage in the approach to complete awakening, but let's just leave it at that. So I probably haven't really explained yet how all this helped Xuan Zang while he was crossing the Gobi Desert and fighting the bandits and all that sort of stuff. And it was because it showed him that he didn't need to take things so seriously for a start. Because of complete openness, he could hang loose from his sense of self, his anxious self-preservation, his expectations, and that means he could face the unknown, he could cope with all these unforeseen things happening to him. He could even enter strange lands, he could meet extraordinary people, he could face danger and hardship, even death. Death was all right. With Shunyata, death is fine, it's okay. So he could face that death. And he could do this because he had this confidence in Leaping Wisdom. He knew that he was experiencing things as they are, without self-centeredness, without mistaken assumptions getting in the way. So on one occasion he was captured by a Hindu tribe, and they believed in human sacrifice. Although modern Hinduism is actually very non-violent, but this seems to have been something that only arose after Buddhism. It seems that some branches of Hinduism were actually involved in animal sacrifice and even human sacrifice. So they thought, here's a Buddhist monk, ideal. So they sat him on the altar, ready to do the sacrifice, ready to kill him. So he looked around and he thought, I can't get out of this, can I? He said, I cannot escape. There were too many of them, there's no way. So he thought, well, I'll just meditate then. So he sat on the altar and started meditating. Quite serenely, just waiting for his death. Didn't have any worries, didn't have any regrets about it. And his demeanour completely unsettled, according to the story, I don't know if it's true, but completely unsettled the tribespeople. They couldn't understand it. He shouldn't be doing that. He should be fighting, or he should be scared, he should be something.
That buys into that a few weeks ago, the hare in the moon.
Yeah.
And all that leaping.
Yeah.
Why they use that imagery.
It's the same image of leaping with the hare, that's right, yeah. And so one of his companions said, they thought, this is a good opportunity. And they said, do you realise this is a great being you've got here on the altar? Do you know what will happen if you kill him? You'll get into terrible trouble. The gods will be very, very angry. And so they let him go. So Xuan Zang was completely focused on what he was trying to achieve, but not in an egotistical way. The Heart Sutra had persuaded him that all he needed to rely on was the depth of his own vision, his own leaping wisdom. He didn't even need the words of the Heart Sutra itself. But perhaps paradoxically, he carts home 500 boxes full of the ancient Indian Buddhist sutras, and he presented them all to the Emperor of China, and spent the rest of his life translating them, studying them, and teaching them, and wanting to sort of make use of them in China, to make China a better place. And I think he did leave China a better place after his death. He had a very, very positive impact. So one day we won't need any of these words, but until that day comes, we need to choose the words that we revere, that we study, that we trust, with as much wisdom as we can muster. We're on this journey, like Tripitaka, like Xuan Zang. with monkey and sandy and pigsy and so on. And eventually we'll find the teachings in these exotic locations of the Buddhist scriptures, and we can stick them in our rucksacks, carry them back through many dangers, translate them, make them our own. Because everybody has to do this translating. It's not just a question of translating from Chinese into English. You've got to translate it so it makes some sense to you, so it actually works for you. So translation is the business of everybody, it seems to me. Make them your own, put them into practice, and then throw them away, leave them behind, ditch them, because you don't need them anymore. Okay, so I'll leave that there. We've got a few minutes if anyone has any general questions. I hope that gives you a sense of the way the Heart Sutra works, especially according to commentators like Han Shan. And if you're interested in exploring it more, I don't think I've got quite enough here for everybody, but there's the translation I used and also a few references at the end, including Han Shan's discussion of the Heart Sutra and some other very useful books on the Heart Sutra.
We hope you enjoyed this week's podcast. Please help us keep this free. Make a contribution at freebuddhistaudio.com/donate. And thank you.